Your mind can turn one problem into a prison, one message they did not answer, one bill you are worried about, one mistake you wish you could undo, one future you keep trying to solve before it even arrives. And before you know it, you are not living your life anymore. You are living inside a courtroom in your own head, defending yourself against things that have not happened, arguing with people who are not in the room, and preparing for disasters that may never come. The Stoics understood this. Epictetus wrote in the Enchiridion, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the principles and notions which they form concerning things." That is not a cold idea. It is a hopeful one. Because if the thing itself is not always what destroys your peace, then your peace is not completely at the mercy of the world. It means there is a small space between what happens and what your mind decides it means. And in that space, freedom begins. Overthinking often pretends to be wisdom. It tells you, I am just being careful. I am just preparing. I am just making sure nothing goes wrong. But most of the time, overthinking is not preparation. It is fear trying to feel useful. It is the mind building a future catastrophe so detailed that your body starts reacting as if it is already real. You can be sitting in a quiet room, completely safe, while your imagination makes your heart race as if danger is already at the door. This is why overthinking is so exhausting. Your body pays the price for stories your mind has not proven. Seneca wrote to Lucilius, "There are more things likely to frighten us than there are to crush us. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Notice what he is saying. He is not saying your fears are stupid. He is not saying your problems are fake. He is not saying pain does not exist. He is saying the mind has the power to make you live through pain twice. First in imagination, then again if it actually happens. And often the second suffering never even arrives. You worried for days about the conversation, and it ended in 5 minutes. You lost sleep over the mistake, and most people barely noticed. You imagined rejection, humiliation, failure, abandonment, and then life simply continued. This does not mean nothing matters. It means your mind is not always a reliable narrator when it is afraid. Fear speaks with certainty because certainty feels safer than mystery. It says, "This will go wrong." It says, "They are judging you." It says, "You are behind." It says, "You should have known better." But certainty is not the same as truth, and intensity is not the same as wisdom. This is where optimism matters. Not naive optimism, not pretending everything will be fine, not forcing a smile over real fear. Stoic optimism is different. It says, I do not know what will happen, but I know I can meet it with character. I do not control every outcome, but I can control the next honest action. I do not need my thoughts to become silent before I can become steady. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment." That line is powerful because it gives responsibility without shame. It does not say, nothing should hurt you. It says, look again. Is the pain coming only from what happened, or also from the meaning you attached to it? Maybe the unanswered message does not mean they hate you. Maybe the slow month does not mean you are failing. Maybe the awkward moment does not mean everyone is judging you. Maybe the uncertainty ahead does not mean you are unsafe. The mind loves to turn a question into a verdict. Will this work out? Becomes, this will fail. Why are they quiet? Becomes, I did something wrong. What if I am behind? Becomes, I have ruined my life. But a thought is not a prophecy. A fear is not a fact. And a feeling, no matter how strong, is not always a command. The first step to protecting your peace is not to fight every thought. It is to stop crowning every thought as king. When a fearful thought arrives, you do not have to obey it immediately. You can notice it. You can name it. You can say, this is my mind trying to protect me, but protection is not the same as truth. That single pause can save you from hours of inner chaos. Because peace does not begin when life becomes perfectly certain. Peace begins when you stop demanding certainty before you allow yourself to breathe. Epictetus begins the Enchiridion with one of the most important ideas in all of Stoicism. Of things, some are in our power, and others are not. Simple words. But if you actually live by them, they can change the entire shape of your mind. Most overthinking comes from trying to mentally control what is not in your hands. Other people's opinions, other people's timing, the past, the outcome, the economy, the algorithm, the version of you someone else decided to believe in. The Stoic path is not to stop caring. It is to care in the right direction. Care about your effort. Care about your honesty. Care about your discipline. Care about the words you choose. Care about the way you show up when no one is clapping. But do not hand your entire nervous system to things you cannot steer. This is where optimistic Stoicism becomes so practical. It does not tell you nothing matters. It tells you your character still matters, even when the outcome is uncertain. That means you can be worried and still act with courage. You can be disappointed and still act with dignity. You can be unsure and still take the next right step. You do not have to wait until fear disappears before you become strong. Strength is what you practice while fear is still in the room. So when your mind starts spinning, do not ask, how do I solve my entire life right now? Ask something smaller, something cleaner. What is actually in my control in the next 10 minutes? Maybe it is sending the honest message. Maybe it is paying the one bill you can pay. Maybe it is apologizing without defending yourself. Maybe it is closing the app that keeps making you compare your life to someone else's highlight reel. Maybe it is taking a walk until your body remembers that you are safe. The mind wants a perfect answer, but peace often returns through one humble action. This is why overthinking loses power when it meets responsibility. Not the heavy kind of responsibility that says everything is your fault. The lighter, stronger kind that says, this part is mine. This breath is mine. This choice is mine. This response is mine. This moment is mine to meet well. And the rest? The rest can be released, not because you do not care, but because you are finally caring wisely. A calm person is not someone with an easy life. A calm person is someone who has stopped making every thought an emergency. They still feel fear. They still face uncertainty. They still have days where the future looks unclear. But they have learned not to abandon themselves every time the mind tells a frightening story. That is the real promise of Stoicism. Not that you will never hurt, not that you will never worry, not that life will finally arrange itself exactly the way you wanted. The promise is that you can become the kind of person who meets life without being owned by every wave. The Stoics did not teach people to become stone. They taught people to become steady. There is a difference. A stone feels nothing. A steady person feels deeply, but does not let every feeling become a master. A steady person can love without clinging, work without panic, hope without demanding, and lose without becoming lost. That is why this philosophy is not dark. At its best, it is deeply optimistic, because it says that even when the outside world is unstable, something inside you can still be trained. Something inside you can still become honest, patient, brave, and free. You are not finished just because your mind is loud. You are not weak because you worry. You are human, and humans can practice. So today, if your mind is loud, do not hate it. It is trying to protect you. But gently remind it, we are not living every possible future today. We are living this moment. And in this moment, we can choose the next honest action. We can choose not to rehearse disaster. We can choose not to turn uncertainty into punishment. We can choose not to mistake worry for love, or fear for wisdom, or control for peace. You cannot always quiet the world, but you can stop inviting the whole world into your mind. You can close the courtroom. You can leave the imagined argument. You can return to the life that is actually here. And maybe that is where peace begins. Not in a perfect future, not in a life without problems, not in becoming emotionless or untouchable, but in the quiet decision to come back to yourself again and again, one thought at a time, one breath at a time, one honest action at a time. Peace is not found when life finally gets quiet. Peace is practiced while life is loud. And the more you practice, the more you realize your thoughts can visit without becoming your home. And if your thoughts can visit without becoming your home, then you can begin to build a different kind of inner life. Not a life where nothing ever hurts. Not a life where you never worry. A life where worry no longer gets to be the architect of your entire day. Marcus Aurelius returned to this idea again and again. In Meditations, he wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." That is one of the clearest warnings in Stoicism, because what you repeat in your mind does not simply pass through you. It starts to shape the atmosphere you live in. If you rehearse disaster every morning, the day begins to feel dangerous before anything has happened. If you replay old pain every night, the past starts taking up space that belongs to rest. If you keep telling yourself that you are behind, broken, rejected, or unsafe, your mind begins to look for evidence to prove the story true. So the question is not only, what am I thinking? The deeper question is, what kind of person are these thoughts training me to become? This is why the Stoics were so careful with attention. They understood that attention is not a small thing. What you give attention to, you give power to. What you return to every day becomes familiar. And what becomes familiar begins to feel like reality. Epictetus said, "If you wish to be good, first believe that you are bad." At first, that sounds harsh, but the meaning is not hopeless. He is saying that growth begins when we stop pretending our mind is already perfectly trained. We can admit, I overthink, I react, I imagine the worst. I give too much power to things outside my control. And then, without shame, we begin again. That is the optimistic part. You are not trapped with the first version of your mind. You can train a new response. You can practice a calmer interpretation. You can become less available to panic, less obedient to fear, less addicted to solving imaginary problems at midnight. Seneca wrote, "No man is crushed by misfortune unless he has first been deceived by prosperity." Meaning, if we expect life to be perfectly smooth, every difficulty feels like a betrayal. But if we expect life to include uncertainty, delay, loss, awkwardness, and change, then those things no longer have to shock us every time they arrive. This does not make life darker. It makes us more prepared to meet it with an open hand. The Stoic does not say, nothing bad will happen. The Stoic says, whatever happens, I will try to meet it with wisdom. That is a much stronger hope, because it does not depend on the world behaving perfectly. It depends on your willingness to return to yourself. So if you are struggling with overthinking right now, do not treat this as something you listen to once and forget. Let it become a practice. Listen to this episode every day for the next 7 days. Listen first thing in the morning, before the world has a chance to pull your mind in 10 directions. Or listen at night as you are going to sleep, when your thoughts usually try to become loudest. And each time, do not try to memorize every word. Just notice one sentence that meets you where you are. One sentence that gives you back your breath. One sentence that reminds you, I do not have to live inside every thought my mind creates. After 7 days, you may notice something subtle. Not that your problems have magically disappeared, but that there is more space between the thought and your reaction. More space between fear and obedience. More space between uncertainty and panic. And that space is where your peace begins to return. So come back to this whenever your mind starts building prisons out of possibilities. Come back when you feel behind. Come back when you are waiting for an answer. Come back when the future feels too loud. And remember, the goal is not to become a person who never thinks deeply. The goal is to become a person whose thoughts serve life instead of stealing it. Because your peace is not something the world gives you when everything finally goes your way. Your peace is something you practice protecting, quietly, patiently, every day. And one day, you realize the mind that once trapped you has become the place you learn to return home.